All right, let's jump into this power grid deep dive.
Mm.
You've been digging deep into their world. Financial reports, sustainability goals, even news articles. It's a lot to sift through.
It looks like you're really trying to get the full picture, especially with those reports on India's energy future, big picture stuff.
Exactly. So today, we're going to try to unearth the most interesting bits. We'll explore power grid's role in the Indian energy landscape, how their business works, their financial health, and even peek at their management team.
Sounds good. Let's dive right in. Power grid. They're the heart of India's power grid. The largest transmission utility, in fact. They connect the power generation to the people who use it. Pretty critical role, wouldn't you say?
So they're like the highway system, but for electricity.
Perfect analogy. They make sure electricity flows smoothly from those power plants, all kinds, thermal, hydro, even renewable, all the way to homes and businesses across India. Their network is massive, thousands of kilometers connecting different regions and ensuring a reliable power supply.
It's amazing how much we rely on them every day without even realizing it.
Isn't it? And with India's renewable energy goals, essential for their energy security. Speaking of, power grid is really focusing on integrating that green energy into the grid.
Oh yeah, they've been all over the news with the Green Energy Corridor project, right?
Exactly. Especially that massive 13 GW renewable energy project in Ladakh. Think about it, enough to power over 10 million homes with clean energy.
Wow, that's incredible. I also read that they're looking at green hydrogen too. Sounds like they're thinking long term.
Definitely forward thinking. They even want to become what they call a net water positive organization by 2030. So they'll replenish more water than they consume. It's ambitious. Sustainability isn't just talk for them.
It really shows a commitment beyond just emissions. Impressive. But let's talk business for a minute. How does Power Grid make money? What's their business model?
They're bread and butter. Transmitting electricity, they earn revenue based on how much electricity is transmitted and their assets availability.
So the more electricity flowing through their lines, the more they earn.
Essentially, yes. But, and this is key, it's a regulated business. The Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, SEC for short, sets the tariffs they can charge. Makes sure it's fair for consumers while Power Grid gets a decent return on their investments.
Makes sense. Such a vital service. Got to have some government oversight, right? But I saw they have other revenue streams too, right? Something about consultancy services and even a telecom business.
Good eye, they do. They leverage their knowledge, provide consultancy in the power transmission and distribution sector. And, get this, they've cleverly used their fiber optic network, the one running along the transmission lines, to offer telecom services. Leased lines, internet connectivity, you name it.
Smart move, making the most of what they already have. Speaking of assets, let's look at their financials. Their profit and loss statement, their revenue from operations is a whopping 45,000 crore.
And their profit after tax, that's after all expenses and taxes, mind you, is an impressive 15,573 crore. They're definitely profitable, showing strong performance.
But I imagine their expenses must be huge, given their scale. What are their biggest costs?
Employee benefits. Makes sense, right? Big workforce. Then there's finance costs from their borrowings, plus depreciation and amortization. Keeping those massive transmission lines up and running is a pricey business.
I bet. But they seem to be managing costs well, still turning a profit. What about their balance sheet? That gives us a snapshot of their assets, liabilities, and equity, right?
Exactly. And their biggest asset? Property, plant, and equipment. All those transmission lines, substations, the whole infrastructure shebang. Valued at over 300,000 crore.
That's a lot of infrastructure. What about on the liability side?
Borrowings. Over 120,000 crore. They've used this to fund those big investments and expansions we talked about. But their debt-to-equity ratio is about 1.4. That's considered healthy, manageable.
So they're not over-leveraged. What's their equity like?
Stands at over 87,000 crore, indicating a strong foundation. Their return on net worth is 17.87%. That means that for every euro invested, they're generating 17.87 in profit. Pretty efficient use of capital.
So far, so good. Strong financials, managing their debt well. But who are the people driving this success? Who are the key players at Power Grid?
Power Grid is a public sector undertaking, meaning the government of India is the majority shareholder, holds over 51% of the equity. But they've got a professional management team, led by the chairman and managing director, with a whole team of experienced executives.
So it's a mix of government oversight and professional management. What about their board of directors? Who are they?
A blend of executive and independent directors ensures a good balance of perspectives and expertise. They provide the strategic guidance, make sure everything runs smoothly, a crucial part of their governance.
Sounds like a solid structure. But even with a strong team and great financials, every company faces challenges. What are some of the hurdles for Power Grid?
Land acquisition, for one. Always a tricky process in India, especially for those large-scale infrastructure projects, the ones that span across states. Then there's the competition. Private sector players are jumping into the transmission game, bringing their own expertise, and, of course, money.
And I'm sure the regulations play a big role too.
Absolutely. Any changes in tariffs or environmental clearances can have a big impact on their bottom line.
Definitely a lot to navigate. Sounds like they've got a full plate. But I'm curious about their plans for the future. How are they planning to use funds to fuel their growth, with all these expansion plans?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's precisely what we'll be tackling in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into those capital expenditure plans, how they're approaching this renewable energy integration, and how they plan to stay competitive in this evolving landscape.
Sounds like we've got a lot more to uncover.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back to our Power Grid Deep Dive. Last time, we covered a lot of ground, their vital role in India's energy landscape, their sustainability efforts, those impressive financials. Now, let's talk about their plans. How are they going to use their resources to grow and keep up with this ever-changing energy sector?
You're thinking about their capital expenditure plans, those big projects they've got lined up?
Exactly. And we touched on the Ladakh project, but what else is on their radar? How are they planning to, expand and strengthen their network?
One major focus is making that national grid even stronger. Gotta ensure that reliable power supply across the country, right? That means upgrading existing transmission lines, building new substations, and adopting new technologies, all to keep that grid stable.
So it's not just about expanding, but making the current grid more robust, more efficient.
Exactly. And of course, they're pouring money into integrating renewable energy sources. Remember that 13 GW project in Ladakh, a prime example of their commitment to green energy.
And they're not stopping there, are they? I read they're even looking at connecting offshore wind farms. That's a huge growth area for India's renewable energy.
You're right. Connecting those offshore wind farms to the mainland grid is a big undertaking, requires some serious tech and infrastructure, but it's crucial for India to hit those ambitious renewable energy targets they've set.
They're really shaping India's clean energy future. But how are they paying for all of this? These massive projects have to be expensive.
It's a mix of internal accruals, borrowings, and some strategic partnerships. Remember how we talked about their strong financial performance? That healthy cash flow they generate is a major funding source.
So they're reinvesting their profits back into the business. Always a good sign.
Definitely a plus. They're also tapping into debt markets, which isn't unusual for companies with big infrastructure needs. And they're looking for partnerships, too. International institutions, investors who want to support India's energy transition.
A multi-pronged approach to financing.
Yeah.
Smart. But with all this talk of expansion and investment, are they overlooking their current assets? How are they keeping the existing transmission network in top shape?
That's a great point. They're not neglecting their existing assets. They're putting money into advanced technology for grid management, predictive maintenance, real-time monitoring, all to make sure those transmission lines are operating at peak performance.
Balancing growth with operational excellence. It's a tightrope walk.
It is. They know a reliable network is their bread and butter, and they're making sure it stays that way. Speaking of competition, how is Power Grid stacking up against the rivals, especially with those private players entering the market?
Right. We mentioned Adani Transmission, Sterlite Power, Tata Power. Tough competition. How is Power Grid setting themselves apart?
They're banking on experience. They've got a deep understanding of the Indian power sector, a solid track record. They've been in the game for a long time and built a strong reputation.
Experience matters in this industry.
Absolutely. And they're actively bidding for new projects through those competitive bidding processes like the TBCB, the tariff-based competitive bidding. Plus, they're embracing innovation, adopting new tech to stay efficient and offer competitive solutions.
So they're not backing down from the competition, they're rising to the challenge.
Exactly. They're also focusing on niche areas like high voltage, direct current transmission, HVDC. That's becoming increasingly important for renewables, especially when they're far from the cities.
HVDC, that's a new one.
Think of it as a superhighway for electricity. Long-distance transmission with minimal energy loss. Perfect for integrating those far-flung renewable energy sources.
So they're staying ahead of the curve, investing in the tech of the future. Smart.
They have to, right? They're expanding their consultancy services too, using that expertise to generate more revenue. Not just in India, but they're helping other countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, develop their power infrastructure.
Wow, they're going global.
They are, and they're not stopping there. Looking at green hydrogen energy storage solutions, they're aiming to be a major player in the broader energy transition.
It's impressive how they're diversifying, adapting to the changes in the energy sector.
Adapt or die, right?
Yeah.
The energy landscape is changing fast. Renewable energy growth, decentralized generation, the demand for electricity just keeps going up. Power grid is making sure they're ready for it all.
Okay, we've covered growth plans, funding, competition. But before we wrap up, let's talk about something a bit sensitive. Related party transactions. I know these can be, well, controversial, especially for a government-owned company like Power Grid.
Transparency is key, you're right. Power grid, as a public sector undertaking, does have transactions with other government-controlled entities, procuring equipment, services, things like that.
So how do they ensure everything's above board? No conflict of interest issues.
They've stated all these transactions are done at market terms using a competitive bidding process. No favoritism, everything's transparent.
Good to hear. Sounds like they're committed to ethical practices.
They are. Now, for the final part of our deep dive, we'll look at how analysts are valuing Power Grid, what their outlook is, and what challenges might pop up in the next few years.
Sounds like a good place to pick up. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really dug into Power Grid, haven't we? Their role in India's energy world, their sustainability focus, those rock-solid financials, their growth strategies, even some of the bumps they might face along the way.
And don't forget the competition. They're not sitting still, that's for sure.
Right. But now, let's talk valuation. Let's see what the market thinks of Power Grid. How do they measure up against everyone else?
You're thinking like an investor, trying to figure out their worth, their potential.
Exactly. What's the buzz around Power Grid?
Well, analysts, they have their ways, lots of tools in their belt. Discounted cash flow analysis, that's one, looking at future cash flows, And then there's precedent transaction analysis, looking at similar companies that have been bought or sold recently.
So they're looking at Power Grid now, what they could be earning in the future, and comparing them to their peers, right?
Yep. Plus, they factor in market trends, the overall economy. And for Power Grid, the outlook is generally positive. They see a company ready to capitalize on India's growth, that increasing demand for electricity.
Especially with all their renewable energy integration efforts. Strengthening the national grid, too. Big growth drivers, for sure.
Definitely. That sustainability commitment, their role in India's energy transition, investors are paying attention. But it's not just growth, it's stability. Power grids in a regulated environment, which makes things more predictable, lower risk, you see.
So their valuation is a mix of things. Their financial performance, their potential, the regulations, how they're positioned in the market.
Exactly. It's a puzzle with many pieces. And of course, valuations can go up and down. The market is what it is. But Power Grid's got those strong fundamentals, consistent performance, that makes them appealing to investors.
Sounds like they're hitting all the right notes. But no company's perfect, right? What are some of those potential roadblocks for Power Grid down the line?
One challenge is keeping up with the changing energy landscape. India's going decentralized,
Yeah.
Rooftop solar, microgrids, those are becoming more popular. Could shake up that traditional centralized model Power Grid's built on.
So they need to adapt, stay innovative.
Right, figure out how to integrate those decentralized sources into the grid. Maybe explore some new business models. The market's evolving, they have to evolve with it.
It's a good reminder that even for a giant like Power Grid, you can't just sit back and relax.
Exactly. Another thing, managing those risks that come with big infrastructure projects, big investments, complex logistics, regulatory hurdles. It's a lot to juggle.
And we can't forget those land acquisition and environmental clearance issues. Always a headache.
Right. Those can delay projects, drive up costs, and impact profits.
So Power Grid's got a lot on their plate, that's for sure.
They do, but they've shown they can handle it. Resilient, adaptable, and they're working hard to minimize those risks.
Well, this has been quite the journey. We've explored Power Grid inside and out, their impact on India's energy, their commitment to sustainability, their financial strength, their growth strategies, the challenges they face, even how the market views them.
We've really gotten to know them, haven't we?
Our listeners should have a really solid understanding of Power Grid after this deep dive. But before we go, let's leave them with something to think about. India's embracing electric vehicles, right? That means a huge demand for charging infrastructure. What role will power grid play in this electric vehicle revolution? Will they adapt, change their infrastructure and business models?
An excellent question. It'll be interesting to see how Power Grid navigates this exciting new landscape.
Definitely something to watch out for. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time.